Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, a case that baffled police. Who was behind the brutal attacks on a Vancouver nurse that went on for 7 years?
James told police she was struck on the head, injected with something and stabbed.
Why would somebody break into your house and pin a note to your hand, now you're going to die?
It was definitely scare tactics, something to keep her off guard.
Cindy was a gorgeous woman, those lovely eyes that just lit up. Guys just got smitten with her.
One of Cindy's friends found her moaning and slumped in an outdoor basement stairwell.
There was never a fingerprint, or a fiber. The police said it was like investigating a ghost.
She was threatened that if she ever told the police, that would be the end of her.
They found her car abandoned outside a bank.
There was a drop of blood, of her blood on the car. It was just all so mysterious.
When she's missing, it's like, oh my God, what has happened? Where has she gone? Who has taken her?
A case where nobody knows what to really think, that's rare. And this is one.
Here now is Jules Knox with Cindy James, Terror in the Shadows.
As these jurors filed into the room on the first day of a coroner's inquest, they had no idea what lay ahead.
All rise, please.
They were about to become part of history, key players in what would soon be the longest and most expensive coroner's inquest in Vancouver for its time. The subject was Cindy James. She lived in terror for 7 years, as she told police many times. The jury would later be given the near impossible task of judging what exactly happened in the shadows of the night. But to tell this story, we should go back to the beginning. And a good place to start is this little house in Vancouver's Kerrisdale neighborhood, though it wasn't boarded up at the time.
When I arrived the first day, it was quite an odd feeling to walk up into this rickety old house and think, this is where a mental health center is. But when I walked through the door, it was just kind of a buzz with children and staff. So families came to us because either the family was having difficulties and needing some support in parenting, or the children themselves came with mental health issues.
The mental health center was called Blenheim House. It was run by Cindy James, who at the time was known as Cindy Makepeace. She was a nurse in her late 30s.
Very warm, outgoing. She had lovely, lovely sparkly eyes that just kind of lit up her room. She had a tremendous laugh, and she laughed easily and often. And yeah, just a warmth and a caring about her. It was a real, it was a small team, but it was a team that was very close, and just it had high regard from her right from the very beginning.
She was always very sweet, and she was always immaculate. Even working in the garden, you know, she never got grubby. You know, she's one of these perfect people that you think, how does she get it right all the time? But she did.
Cindy was married to Dr. Roy Makepeace, a man 18 years her senior. For part of his career, he worked at the University of British Columbia. He was head of the Division of Social Psychiatry.
She was a nurse in training. He saw a pretty girl. You know, he was obviously attracted to her from the beginning. He was a strong character and quite eccentric in a way. He was very enthusiastic. He would get very enthusiastic about his hobbies or whatever it was he was doing. He was an all-in, all-out kind of guy.
And when Roy met Cindy, he was all in, even though he was married at the time. Gwen Hewitt is Roy's daughter from his first marriage. Roy left her mom for Cindy.
Once the divorce came through, my mom couldn't see the point in staying in Canada anymore. She only moved there because it was his dream. So she came back to South Africa. After we left, when I was 11 years old, I went back when I was 24. That's the next time I saw him. She didn't really try to connect with me or interact with me more than necessary. But when she did, she always behaved impeccably. She was absolutely perfect. But I mean, it made sense to me. I was the daughter of her husband, and she'd kind of stolen him away from our family.
By 1982, the couple had been married for 16 years, and Roy often called it a match made in heaven.
I noticed that they had separate couches in the living room, separate bedrooms, and separate remotes for the TV. So it seemed to me an odd kind of separated marriage, but they still seemed fine. You know, I didn't pick anything up. My sister said differently. She went to visit them a year later. So she said that there was trouble in the marriage.
He had a really good sense of humor, but he had a temper, you know, and he didn't sort of suffer fools gladly. He was kind of impatient with people. Very smart man.
There was no sense of, I don't really know this person. It seemed like it was, what you get is what you see.
He was almost the same age as her father. I don't think her dad was very happy about that. He was pretty fastidious in his ways and maybe lost his temper at her.
The first inkling that I had that there were difficulties, that Cindy walked down the hallway and had a black eye. And she looked at me and she said, "Don't even ask." And she just walked past me, and that really shook me because I was totally unprepared for something like that to present with her, and also the very clear message that she didn't want to be touched or talked to and wasn't going to account for it. I went in about 15 minutes later into the therapy room, and there's a little bit of a nook in the room, and I suddenly realized that Cindy was standing in that little nook with Roy, and she was sobbing into his shoulder, and he was comforting her.
So did you have any sense that he had any guilt or was responsible for hitting her?
No, I didn't. I didn't have that sense at all, which left me totally mystified about what was going on or what had happened.
The marriage broke down, and then it seemed to be that's when Cindy's problem started.
A few months later, she started to get threatening notes and dead flowers at work, and soon she was unable to separate her personal problems from her responsibilities at her job.
Coming up, as the harassment of Cindy James escalates, questions arise of why someone would stalk a nurse who helps young children. When a Vancouver nurse starts receiving threatening notes at work, her coworkers become alarmed. And then it gets worse. We return now to Jules Knox with Cindy James, Terror in the Shadows.
In October of 1982, Cindy started getting chilling phone calls, sometimes silent, sometimes whispering. By now, Cindy had split from her husband, Roy Makepeace, though they kept in touch.
Once that started happening, he immediately told Cindy, "Get an answering machine, don't take the calls." And he got himself an answering machine as well. So I think normally I'd have to phone twice, once to say, "Hey Dad, where are you? Answer the phone." And then after he got the message, then he would answer. And as far as I know, when the trouble started, she was confiding in him. She was telling him about it, and he was advising her. And of course, he knew exactly what she should do, you know. She must do this and she must do that. I'm sure he was giving her loads of advice, unsolicited advice, as was his nature.
The incidents built slowly, over months. Cindy spotted a midnight prowler in the yard of her home. A rock smashed through her house window. And then someone entered Cindy's home with a key and slashed her pillow. Cindy called police.
And the odd thing was, of course, the first officer who investigated her case moved in with her, which is against all police procedure, right?
That was Constable Pat McBride. He moved in 2 weeks later.
I just know that all of a sudden he's deciding that he's staying to keep her safe, and then I think it kind of evolved from there. Cindy was a gorgeous woman, and those lovely eyes that just lit up, guys just got smitten with her like in the blink of an eye. All of a sudden Pat was showing up in Blenheim House and acting much less like a policeman and much more like a boyfriend.
Were they romantic?
I think it was a sexual relationship, but I'm not positive.
But a police officer living on the premises didn't appear to deter Cindy's stalker. On November 28, 1982, Cindy had some friends over. When one woman went to make a phone call, she discovered Cindy's line was dead. The telephone wire to her home had been cut in 5 places.
Vancouver police officer Pat McBride attended that night, but he can't remember if he had been dispatched or just stopped by because he was living with James at the time. He says James intimated she suspected her ex-husband in the incidents against her.
She also had cut phone lines to her house while Pat McBride was living there. He owned a pair of wire cutters. They looked at them. Whether he was kind of involved in making her more fearful so that she would rely on him more. You know, it's speculation. There's no evidence of it. But he became a suspect in those early days. Was he making some of the calls to try to make Cindy nervous so that she would need him to be there? Was Roy calling to check up, finding this cop living in her house? He was pissed off. I think he may have been checking up on Cindy at times, wondering who was staying there.
In fact, Neil Hall says one time Roy was spotted in his car in the lane behind Cindy's house.
It's suspicious, but it's not unusual for an ex-husband who's still in love with her.
Things didn't work out between Cindy and that police officer, Pat McBride.
A month, maybe 2, Cindy asked him to move out.
Then, on January 27th, 1983, one of Cindy's friends found her moaning and slumped in an outdoor basement stairwell. A black nylon was tightly knotted around her neck, and there were deep gashes to her arms and legs. Cindy told police a man had jumped her in the garage from behind.
To me, it was scare tactics. It was definitely scare tactics. Something to keep her off guard. I would never have thought that somebody was trying to murder her.
Over the next few months, the disturbing phone calls continued. A strangled cat is left in Cindy's yard with a cut-and-paste note. The message read, "You're next."
And the weird thing was, there was never a fingerprint. They set up surveillance cameras in her house, never caught anything. The police said it was like investigating a ghost.
Did police believe Cindy?
Initially they did. They thought the ex-husband was doing this, or he'd hired somebody to do it, to harass her.
The phone rings and it's Interpol and they want to speak to Roy Makepeace's daughter. I was completely taken by surprise. And they didn't tell us why they were phoning. They just were asking if my father was violent. So I had to admit he wasn't violent, but I didn't know why I was being asked.
In the midst of all of this, As Cindy was losing weight and looking very disheveled and still doing a good job managing the program and working with the families, that I thought, how do you do that? How do you split yourself that way? When you watched her light her cigarettes, her hand was shaky. The sparkle wasn't there so much, just not the same bubble.
Frustrated with police and terrified, in November 1983, Cindy hired private investigator Ozzy Caban.
People under those circumstances are always going to feel that they are being neglected or not looked after. I mean, the person is frightened and they feel something is happening to them.
He installed a portable telephone in her home, a two-way radio system for immediate contact with his security office. He had her call in when she moved from location to location and made periodic checks around her home.
On January 30th, 1984, after arriving home from work, Cindy said she was attacked at the back door entrance to her kitchen.
James told police she was struck on the head, injected with something, and stabbed. A private investigator hired to protect her found her unconscious and a paring knife stabbed through her left hand. On the blade of the knife was a note that had a cut-and-paste message, "Now you must die." Blood in the kitchen, hallway, and dining room was mopped all around. James said she had tried to crawl to the phone for help.
Those cut and paste notes are terrifying. The woman's head being chopped off. And somebody spent a lot of time doing it, but they could never find a fingerprint. They were mailed to her, they were left at her house, or put on the windshield of her car. Now you're gonna die. Why would somebody break into your house and pin a note to your hand, now you're gonna die? Why don't they just kill her they had a knife? I mean, what's the point? It doesn't seem to make sense. She's a psychiatric nurse, right? She runs a psychiatric facility.
And of course, then we all sat thinking, you know, who are our clients? We had some dads who were pretty troubled people. Cindy had some ability to kind of influence what was happening. We went to family court and testified about families, and so we found ourselves thinking it must be a former client.
She didn't believe the police were doing enough to protect her. She chronicled a long series of incidents, which has been found in a diary by her family.
They were her own notes, meticulously recording and in some instances analyzing the incident.
Cindy wrote about her anger towards police in her diary. She said, quote, "I doubt if I would ever be able to advise a woman to turn to the police for help. I feel like I was assaulted by them too. Not physically, but certainly emotionally and psychologically."
Coming up, Cindy moves and changes her name. But is it enough to evade her attacker? And will police track down a suspect? Dead phone lines, strangled cats left in the yard, and threatening notes are just the beginning of the troubles for a Vancouver nurse. We return now to Jules Knox with Cindy James, Terror in the Shadows.
On December 11th, 1985, Cindy was attacked again.
She was found in a ditch with a black nylon stocking around her neck and what would appear to be a pinprick in her arm, which would suggest she was drugged.
Her car was located at 29th and Alma. James was shaking, nervous, suffering from hypothermia, and dressed in only jeans and a sweater. She was rushed to University Hospital. James had a variety of cuts and bruises to her body. A paramedic says they could have been caused by tree branches or fingernails. Her neck was red from where a tightly knotted black nylon had been removed. Scratches to her arms and legs are indicative of lacerations, or, say paramedics, needle use.
On Cindy's third day in hospital, she told police she remembered being raped. Privately, in her diary, Cindy later wrote about the attack, a warning that some of this language may be disturbing to some viewers. She said, quote, "The thing I remember most vividly was a terrible pain in my groin. I'm sure someone butted out their cigarette in me. I remember the laughter when I tried to jerk my legs together, but something was holding them stretched apart."
That was a very stressful time because we were pretty stunned that something like this had escalated to this level and began to realize that her life was threatened.
And did you come up with a client that you're like, maybe was there a clear suspect?
No, I don't think so. There were a few people that were given to the police. The message was to the staff, you as a staff of mostly women are safe.
And did you believe that at the time?
Oh, no. Yeah, I think most of us were very cautious and remain cautious. I still have nightmares about being kind of attacked.
At times, police did put Cindy's home under surveillance.
They had a camera and they had police watching 24 hours. And then as soon as surveillance went off, something would happen. So either somebody was really smart and knew about police surveillance, like Roy Makepeace, you know, the psychiatrist, and trying to torture her, mentally torture her for leaving him.
Desperate to escape the mental torment caused by her attacker, Cindy changed her surname from Makepeace to James. She painted her car a different color, and she found a new home.
The move to Richmond from Vancouver was designed to stop the string of strange events haunting Cindy James. They had been going on for 3 years now, ranging from frightening phone calls to attempted murder.
Nothing seemed to happen at least for the 6 or 8 months. And then the first alarm went off. And of course, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning, you jangle out of bed and it's like, oh my God, what is that? So I'm up, my husband is up, he's got his trusty lacrosse grass hockey stick. We go out to see what's going on. We're knocking on her door, Cindy, Cindy, are you okay?
Tammy Carmen and her husband lived next door to Cindy, and the two women worked together at the hospital.
She was frightened. She was very scared. She was anxious. She was looking around, and she just seemed to be terrified.
When you go over there on that first night when the alarm goes off, do you have any idea that there have been all these incidents that have preceded?
No, we didn't.
Neighbors say when Cindy James first had her alarm system installed in her house on Claysmith in Richmond, it wasn't unusual for it to go off late at night or early in the morning. When it was first installed, it actually would go off at least once a week.
After a while, with all the alarms, I mean, we'd be laying there, and sometimes it would be every night. The other neighbors stopped coming out, but Colin and I didn't. We just, you know, what if something happened the one time that you don't respond? I remember one of the times that we had responded to Cindy, and the police were there, and, you know, I was there in the house with her, and, you know, I sort of tried to say something, and the policewoman was very dismissive. So I thought, something's going on. You know, to me, they weren't treating it like an incident. It was, oh yeah, here she goes again.
On April 16, 1986, her friends Agnes and Tom Woodcock stayed with her to alleviate fears she had that someone was stalking her. That night, they awoke to fire burning in the rec room at the front of the lower level of the house. When Agnes went to call the fire department, the phone was dead. There was considerable damage to a downstairs room located at the front of the house.
Agnes and her husband, he was kind of a crusty ferry boat captain. And they were both convinced it was a Molotov cocktail that came through the window trying to kill Cindy.
Agnes was our bus driver, and she actually showed up that morning. She walked down the hall smelling of smoke and smudges all over her. She had already gone and picked all the kids up and brought them for program. She was that dedicated to the work. And then she walked down the hallway, and I said, "My God, what happened?" And she came into the office, and then she told me that they'd been there, and, you know, of course, broke down and very tearful and pretty shattered by the experience.
The fire inspector says burn patterns indicate an accelerant had been poured on this bookshelf and the carpet around it. He saw no source of an accidental start, no electrical appliances, no wiring, no electrical outlets, no chemicals.
There had been dead cats tied to her doorknob. This is the area where I've observed her, where she had been attacked and required hospitalization. This is the area where I attended, where telephone lines were cut by someone, as well as windows being smashed, as well as an attempt to set fire to the basement of her house.
On August 30th, 1988, Cindy wrote in her diary that she received another chilling phone call. "You're dead meat."
She felt that someone was trying to kill her.
What did you know of her husband, Roy Makepeace?
An older man controlling his wife, and he's a psychiatrist. To me, that fit a typical suspect. He had the wherewithal to, you know, hire somebody or be in touch with someone to even just to do the random irritating things like the alarms and broken windows and whatnot. I believe she suspected her ex-husband.
Coming up, another attack leaves Cindy near death. Will she survive? And will the perpetrator leave behind any clues? For 6 years now, Cindy James has been terrorized in the darkness of the night. The assaults appear random, but intensifying, and police are struggling to nail down a suspect. We return now to Jules Knox and Terror in the Shadows.
The black nylon in the center were around the victim's hands. Watch, the black strap has been severed in two. We're at the driver's side of the vehicle now. It's a set of keys on the driveway. There's identification tag and a clip of the pants.
On October 26, 1988, Cindy James was found in her driveway with a nylon wrapped around her neck. Her nurse uniform pants and underwear were found around her ankles. Police had responded to a silent alarm triggered by a panic button Cindy carried with her. After she awoke from a coma, officers recorded their conversation with Cindy.
I just left one foot out the door, and he put, I guess, a knife on my neck. And he told me not to make a sound, or he would, I don't remember what words he used. He would kill me. There was somebody else there, I know.
Somebody else, do you mean like another person besides this, what you just told us?
Somebody else, but he wasn't behind the car. I don't know where he was.
Do you know how you got tied up?
Did I get tied up?
I understand that in the past you've had troubles with your ex-husband.
Yes. A couple of years ago I got a divorce.
Okay, so this incident tonight wouldn't involve him?
I don't see why. There would be no point. It's been a couple of to your cell.
Puzzled and trying to piece together what exactly happened, 3 days later, police interviewed Cindy again.
All of a sudden, someone comes behind me, and I don't know where he came from. And then there was another one there, and I know he came from somewhere on my right, but I don't know where he came from. I don't know what I thought it was going to do, but it was trying to push his knife away or something. And he said, and I don't know exactly what he said, I couldn't hear it, said, it sounds like snuff her, which doesn't make sense. And then I felt something over my mouth and my right arm being pulled back. And I remember thinking, oh my God. And then I don't think I really remember anything else.
2 foreign pubic hairs were found on Cindy's body. But in the 80s, DNA evidence was still in its infancy, and that lead went nowhere. Cindy's father later told reporters it's possible that Cindy may have identified her attacker.
She was threatened that if she ever told the police, that would be the end of her. Or if she ever saw the face of whoever the assailant was, that also would be the end of her.
Well, did she ever see her assailant?
She saw, in one case, she saw the face and a composite drawing was made.
Cindy's family believed her assailant may have told Cindy that if she ever spoke out, her sister and mother would be the next targets. On April 8, 1989, a security guard at the hospital where Cindy now worked found a note on the nurse's car. It said, "Soon, Cindy." Weeks later, on the evening of May 25th, Tammy Carmen got a funny feeling when she noticed Cindy's car wasn't parked in her driveway.
When she went missing, I remember she wasn't there. Didn't see her around. And for some reason it made me suspicious about something. So I phoned and I said, "Cindy, are you all right? Are you all right?" And she never responded. I kept phoning and there was no response.
Cindy had plans to play bridge with her friends, the Woodcocks, that night. And when she wasn't home, the couple drove around Richmond on a hunch. They found her car abandoned outside a bank.
There was a drop of blood, of her blood, on the car. It's just, it was just all so mysterious as to, we really didn't know much about her at that time.
Underneath her vehicle, police found Cindy's bank card and a transaction slip showing she deposited her paycheck at 7:58 p.m. that day. Her purse and groceries were locked inside the car.
When she's missing, it's like, oh my God, what has happened? Where has she gone? Who has taken her? Obviously something's going on, but we didn't know what.
They went into the grocery store at the mall and ran the groceries through, and they couldn't find anything that matched. That's just kind of odd.
But Cindy hadn't shopped at the grocery store in the mall, according to Cindy's sister, Melanie Hack. And she said she later found the grocery receipt. It was simply yet another detail that police had overlooked.
Cindy James complained of threatening telephone calls, beatings, dead cats left at her doorstep, and even a rape. She had an elaborate alarm system installed in her house to protect her.
But it wasn't enough. Cindy vanished without a trace. Her father, Otto Hack, told reporters he feared his daughter had been abducted.
Did she, and I assume she did, complain to the police that she was the target of some madman?
That's right. She always reported it until recently she got a little bit cynical about it. But
because the police were taking no real action to protect her?
well, in her mind, they weren't doing enough, and of course I can understand why this would be the case.
So on 4 occasions she was assaulted, beaten up, strangled?
And stabbed in some instances.
And her house on 1 occasion was set on fire?
That's right.
Over an 8-year period?
That is right.
When was the last incident relative to her disappearance?
Her major incident was last October.
What happened?
In front of the house here.
What happened there?
Well, she was found in a coma.
Could there have been as many as 50 incidents?
Well, not major incidents.
But
no.
when you count the threatening telephone calls, dead cats, thrown...
Oh, yes, of course. Our own theory is that she knew something that she was not prepared to reveal. She was too frightened to reveal it.
Coming up, did Cindy have a secret? And the search is on. Will the nurse be found safe? After being terrorized for 7 years, Cindy James suddenly goes missing. Her car is found abandoned, and there is no trace of the 44-year-old nurse. We now return to Jules Knox with Cindy James, Terror in the Shadows.
On June 8, 1989, 2 weeks after Cindy went missing, a Richmond road construction crew made a grisly discovery.
The find was made when a Works Department employee walked just a few yards off Blundell Road to relieve himself in a vacant lot.
The hands were behind her back, strapped to her feet, tied to her feet with a rope or a cord, and the face was totally black. You couldn't recognize the face. You could see the hair was blonde.
Did it just look like it had been dumped there, or carefully arranged in there, or covered?
No, it was laying just under the shrubbery, wide open. Yeah. Okay. The chap that went in there to relieve himself, he spotted it, and it was very visible, really, from when you went in there.
Not much of an effort to conceal the body?
No.
Witnesses say there was no indication of stab or bullet wounds and no apparent blood on the body or at the scene.
There was a body with the lady with the maggots coming from her neck and facial area, and she had one hand under her body and the other one was loose on top. It appeared to be like a cord or something hanging off it. And I just assumed the way her body was, because the way her legs were, she was hogtied and dumped there. And the rope or whatever was tying her broke when she was dumped. But she had affairs with a shrink and also an RCMP member, so some suspicion there. And probably one of the reasons I ran to the phone to phone a news company as soon as the body was found, because I wanted some representative from the news media to be there and see what was happening. I didn't want the policeman to get away with anything.
44-year-old Cindy James, a nurse at Richmond General Hospital, disappeared May 25th. She was last seen at a bank machine a short distance from where the body was found.
The woman had told family and friends she thought she was being followed and feared she would be murdered.
The body was identified through fingerprints. It was Cindy.
I was stunned, yeah. It was like, my God, it's over. That was kind of my first thought, was it's over.
We instantly thought that she had been murdered. It's like, oh my God, it's happened, somebody's killed her. And that was a shock. It sort of brings it home a little bit closer,
Kind, considerate, lovable, always caring for people, wouldn't harm a fly. This is what really saddens us.
We went through that house and it was kind of spooky. It seemed like it had satanic markings, spray painted on the wall. It was an abandoned house, and there was a guy living behind the house.
If Cindy died where she was found, that meant a squatter living just a few meters away apparently didn't see her body for 2 weeks.
Never heard a thing, never saw anything, didn't smell anything. So it seemed all rather bizarre.
That led private investigator Ozzy Caban to believe her body had been dumped shortly before it was found.
He consulted with a forensic pathologist, I think, and they said pig meat's the most close to human meat.
Caban bought pig meat and left it in the yard where Cindy's body had been found. It was soon attacked by rodents. Caban couldn't understand how Cindy's body had been in the yard for 2 weeks and not been ravaged by rats.
I thought that was clever of Ozzy, but I didn't think it really proved the point that he was trying to prove. I mean, it wasn't a silly thing to do, but I didn't think it was a conclusive thing to do.
Could this, there have been previous incidents where she was beaten up and drugged, I think 2 or 3 incidents of that. Could this have been another attempt at that simply went too far? In other words, she was killed by accident?
I have reason to believe that, yes.
So you theorize that's exactly what happened in this case?
It's quite possible.
Throughout the day, members of the Richmond RCMP detachment remained unavailable to answer questions on the direction their homicide investigation was taking. They were also unavailable when family members turned up at the detachment to complain that Cindy James was given inadequate protection while she was alive.
More than a month after her body had been discovered, police said they did not suspect foul play in the death of Cindy James. And they refused to answer questions due to the possibility of a coroner's inquest being held.
I'm a little confused and quite surprised.
Why so?
I still am under the impression that it was a homicide.
Caban says 2 things point to murder. The body could not have been there for 2 weeks unnoticed, not with all the nearby foot traffic, and the way the body was bound.
Both arms and both feet were tied in a hog position behind her back, which leads me to believe somebody else must have done it.
Caban says it would be extremely difficult to hog tie oneself, but the police statement of no foul play points to just that, Cindy James tying her hands and feet behind her back all by herself.
Next week, 80 witnesses testify in front of a jury as the coroner takes a deep dive into Cindy James's death. Was it suicide or murder?
Being there after the incidents did occur and investigating the incidents, I feel that they were real.
Her scrapes didn't seem consistent with a struggle, and there were no signs of needle marks, but her breathing was at half the normal rate, and there were only droplets of blood nearby.
Hello? Hello, Roy?
Here.
Oh, it's Cindy calling. I'm calling because I wanted to talk to you about what's been happening. With the help of hypnosis, I've been able to remember a lot of why things are happening.
His belief was that it had to be the mafia, because it was so sadistic to someone who had never harmed anybody. But as a psychiatrist, he had had threats from patients, because you're dealing with very disturbed people.
She said her house was firebombed, but when the arson investigators testified, they said it was set inside the house. The glass all blew out. If it was an arson, the glass would be found inside. She would have these memory gaps from these attacks. It was very frustrating for police because she didn't really have any clear memory and she thought she was drugged every time.
Under cross-examination, Dr. Marcus said there was an apparently sadistic desire on someone's part to torture her. He said she in fact could have been torturing herself, or it could have been someone else.
I can't remember anybody who knew her well who gave evidence that she was likely to kill herself.
I don't know if she had a personality disorder. If she did, does that give a person the strength and the ability to tie themselves up in knots and lay down in the middle of the bushes where nobody's going to see them.
I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.